y'all, what's up? It's me, AmandaAmor. Welcome to my series here every Wednesday called Amor Wednesdays. I hope you guys have been loving the videos I've been doing. So today I'm going to go ahead and talk about a topic that you guys voted on. Again, if you want to be able to vote for the topics, make sure you follow me on my Instagram at TheInfluenceOfLove, where I put up a poll every week, if not every other week, where you guys can vote on one of two topics, okay? So this week you guys voted on how to have better communication with your significant other. And I was actually really surprised this was so neck and neck with another topic that I'm most likely going to do next week, because communication is something that's really honestly a challenge for so many of us. I think that as you get to know people and as you build relationships with people, you notice everyone communicates differently. And when it comes to being in a romantic relationship, having a significant other, you know, everyone comes from different backgrounds, different upbringings, and lots of times communication can be something that can definitely become a factor in a relationship. You'll very quickly realize whether you communicate very well with a person or whether you don't. And another thing is that over time, as we are with a person, we tend to grow in our communication, whether it increasingly gets better or it increasingly gets worse. So I put together 5 tips that I honestly feel will be very helpful for any person. I want, first and foremost, for any guys who are watching this, you might feel like you're not communicating the best with your significant other, to know that that doesn't mean that you have a bad relationship or that you're a horrible communicator. A lot of people have really good relationships, but sometimes may come across an issue in their relationship where there's just something you can't communicate well. And many times that's because there's something that you may not know about your significant other, or something that you do need to communicate more about that may have not been communicated in the beginning. Lots of times when we're in relationships, we are really good at hiding things and characteristics about ourselves that, you know, we would rather not show to people, or we just don't know how to articulate. And very often it's because we grow up in situations where we're just not taught how to communicate correctly. And so I want to go ahead and bring y'all the very first point here, which is the first thing that I think is very important to consider, the first tip, which is to be open to the fact that you may not always be communicating the most effectively or to the best of your ability. I think the thing about being a good communicator is recognizing that you can always grow in how you communicate. You can always grow in understanding what works best. When you're with another person, you're going to realize that they may communicate differently than you. There may be things that affect them in ways that doesn't affect you. And so lots of times when we get around people, we think that, oh, well, this is what works for me. So, you know, I'm just trying to be mindful of what works for you. But then we're using methods that would really be better suited for ourselves, but not for this specific individual, right? Not for your significant other. I want y'all to understand that desire and intent is one thing, but awareness and skill is another. So you can have the desire or the intention to want to communicate to the best of your ability with the person that you love, but just having the desire or the intention sometimes is not enough, because you may not be aware of how you're communicating, and you may not have a certain skill level to know how to communicate effectively. And this is where you have to know and kind of learn your significant other. Many times we're just looking at ourselves and what works for us, and we're not looking at what the other person is saying. And that's why lots of times people say it's better to talk less and listen more. Sometimes we could be speaking or saying more than we need to say instead of really listening to what the other person is saying. So here's the thing, right? You may want to communicate better, but you just simply don't know how. You don't know how to communicate something, or you don't know how to talk to the person that you love. You want to make it better. You wish you knew what to say, but you just don't know how to say it. Maybe you're trying so hard to understand each other, but there's just something you're not connecting to. No matter how you break it down, no matter how calmly you try to communicate it, it's just like it's not working. So what I want you to be able to understand is that at that point, you want to seek the information that you don't know. You know, by watching videos like this, you want to take several things to consider. It may not just be one thing. You may watch my video and this may help you a lot, but there may still be more things that you need to learn in. And it's because communication is really how you articulate yourself. It's how you are as a person, as an individual, and you're growing and changing every day. So the way you communicate is also going to grow and change too. You know, the way you used to talk when you were 5 years old versus when you were 15 is going to be different when you're 35. Like, you're just going to change as a person, and you're going to evolve, and you're going to learn how you are and what works for you. Don't think that you're being a bad person to your significant other, or you don't care about them. That may not be the case. It may just be that you struggle with getting your point across, or with explaining things that maybe you've never verbalized, things that you've always kind of dealt with that were kind of unspoken. but maybe nobody knew how to draw that out of you or how to communicate that with you. Something else I think is very, very important is learning the love language of your significant other. So let me get this book really quick. All right, so I wanted to show y'all this book that actually one of my family members had gifted to me and my husband right before we got married. And it's called The 5 Love Languages. I don't know if you guys ever seen this, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're in a relationship or in a marriage, of course. This is something that I feel could help a lot of people. So basically the 5 love languages is centered around 5 different things, 5 different ways that we express love for one another, right? And so I feel like this also goes hand in hand with communication, because sometimes we think communication is just words, but there's several different ways that we communicate things. And lots of times the way we communicate stuff is even nonverbal, like it's through our body language. It's not even through how we're talking or how we even want to come off, right? So the first one is words of affirmation. For some people, they need to hear verbal affirmation. Like they need to be affirmed. They need to be told certain things, because many times, this is what I've kind of heard, like many times our love language is whatever we didn't receive as a child. When you're in a relationship and you aren't realizing what you're fighting and battling up against, lots of times it's just your significant other's upbringing or just the way that they saw their mom and dad communicate. I think this is something that we don't talk about enough in relationships, because a lot of people just get in a relationship, but they don't consider how was this person raised and how did they see love their entire life. And so even for the most intentional and well-meaning person and a person who doesn't want to look like what they grew up around, they still may have taken in certain things that they think is love, or may even still be struggling with things that they didn't receive that was supposed to be love in their life because of the type of household they grew up in. Words of affirmation is one that's very important if you know you're the type of person that you need to be told, you know, that you're loved. Like you need certain things to be verbalized to you because you weren't told enough that you were special, that you were important. You weren't encouraged enough. Maybe you were criticized a lot as a child, but you were just not affirmed. You were just not shown that love verbally. You also have quality time. For some people, it's very important for them to have downtime with their significant other, you know, to have that time where you guys get to talk, you guys get to go out, try new things. That's very, very important. For some people, that's how they express love. The other one is receiving gifts. A lot of people like gifts, and it doesn't have to be expensive gifts, but sometimes something as simple as receiving a bouquet of roses. Or just like a little something, like a little dessert, or, you know, for some people it can be something that's pricier, but some people just like gifts. Like that to them is showing and receiving love. You also have acts of service, which is like you doing something for someone that, you know, may not be the fun thing to do, but to them it's like, thank you so much for mowing the lawn or doing the dishes or, you know, cleaning the house. You know what I'm saying? Like those things are very important as well. And last but not least, physical touch. It's very important for people to also be hugged, you know, kissed. Like those things are very, very important. So I just wanted to stress that just really quick. I didn't want to take too much time with that, but I really recommend this book, The 5 Love Languages, because it's really going to help you better communicate with your significant other and understand which love language they need. Because you might feel like you really need words of affirmation, but your significant other really needs quality time. You know, it's great that, or even like you might be the type of person where you're always giving gifts, but your significant other is like, you know what, I need more from you in this area where it's like you're not picking up certain responsibilities around the house of like taking care of the kids or just getting certain things done that we need to have together at this point in our relationship. So just keep that in mind, right, y'all? I think that's just super, super important. You just have to also remember, like, there's no need to be defensive. I know that in communication and when you're trying to break something down to people, it's very, you know, it's very easy for you to get combative. It's very easy for you to get defensive, but try not to be that kind of person. If you want to have better communication, try not to be defensive. I know that it's so hard for us. It's human nature that we don't like to hear what we do wrong, and we don't like to be told that we're wrong, y'all. Like, we don't like to admit that we have a flaw, especially when we can't see it. But be open to the fact that there may be some things that you're just not aware of that you do, and your significant other may want to point that out to you. And don't be so afraid of criticism that you don't want to hear what you do wrong. We all do something wrong, and that's the number one thing that I want for anyone who's watching this to understand is we all have something we're working on. There's no person, for as much as y'all think that there's perfect relationships, and people might say, oh, we never fight about this or we never fight about that or whatever it may be. I do think that there are certain relationships where people fight less than others, like definitely. But I also think that even if you get into a disagreement or an argument, that doesn't mean you have a bad relationship, okay? And I'm gonna get more into the other tips for those who may know you get into really bad arguments. But I just want y'all to understand that we're all working on something, myself included. Like, I'm really working on a lot, understanding better how I communicate. And it's helping me so much because of the fact that I do video content. And so communication is something I'm working on every day. Like, even when I first started, when I would do videos, I would stutter, I would forget my thoughts. I wasn't as good at doing this, especially when I was doing live videos. Like, that's when I couldn't even hide it, you know, when I first started filming in 2017. So keep in mind, you're gonna grow as a person, as an individual. And again, as you focus on certain things that you're not great at, you're also gonna focus on that. So don't beat yourself up and don't think that you're, oh my God, you're the worst person. What's important is that you want to change and that you want to work on it. And that's a really good place to start from, okay? So give yourself that credit, because again, no person is perfect and we're all just working on ourselves each and every day, trying to become a better person, a better communicator, all that kind of stuff, right? So I want to go ahead and get to the second point here, which is speak with love, patience, and understanding. I think this is one of the things that can go a very long way when it comes to communicating. Again, because a lot of people can very easily get into a place of using profanity, yelling, screaming. You don't want to do anything that's going to escalate the issue and the problem, right? Like, you want to be the kind of person where you want to keep it as calm as possible, and you want to be able to communicate again in love, patience, and understanding. Like, even if you're quick to snap, really try to practice on not snapping. Try to practice on just having self-control. That could take time to build, but it's something you definitely want to be aware of. I'm very big on, and I verbalize this a lot on my platform, to not talk to people that you love with profanity. It's verbally abusive, okay? And I think too often as people, we get so comfortable with using certain words. For me, because I'm a God-fearing person, one of the first things God dealt with me when I became a Christian was I had to stop cussing, because I was very big on cursing. And luckily, in my relationship with my husband, I always made it a point for us not to curse at each other, even before I was saved, and not to get loud with each other, because I had made that mistake in the past with other people where I just really wanted to just verbalize to them that I was upset. And so I would start cursing. And I really think that it's not a good thing. Like, you can see it could be the silliest thing, and now the conversation has gone way crazy and you become something that you're not. And after it's all said and done, you're like, dang, my bad, I didn't mean to say that, So you got to be very careful with stuff like that. Don't get comfortable with using words that tear people down, tear down the person that you love down, calling them dumb, calling them stupid. Even if you're upset and you're angry and you're frustrated, just don't use words that will, talk them down. Because at the end of the day, this is someone that you want them to feel that you love them, right? And so if you're being verbally abusive to them, that's not communicating that you love them and that you want to have better communication. It's just communicating that, you're angry and you're calling them names, and no one wants that, right? No one wants to be called names and just be, put down verbally. And I also want you to be aware of, how were you raised? Was it normal in your house for you to be verbally abusive, or see people that were verbally abusive? Many times we pick up on things we saw our whole life and we just keep doing it because we just think it's normal. And you also want to just be aware of the fact that, again, like, a lot of the things that you're communicating may just be based off the way you were raised and based off the way that you saw things growing up. And just because you saw it that way doesn't make it okay. Be it physical abuse, verbal abuse, people who are emotionally abusive, where they would, kind of diminish your feelings or not acknowledge them, or not even want to talk about things because to them it was just like, oh, let's just downplay it. So it's really not as bad as you think it is. Like, you want to always be, again, understanding. You want to be able to consider and let the person know that you heard them. You know what I'm saying? I think sometimes people don't like conflict because it verbalizes that there's something wrong. And lots of times we just don't like to admit that there's anything wrong. But I think in order to be a better communicator, you have to be open and ready and willing to just admit if something's not going good, right? Because eventually it's going to hit the fan. Eventually it's going to come out at some point or another. And I believe that it's better to just deal with it head on than to let it spiral and get out of control. Because then it's like, I just feel like as things come up, it's best to be like, all right, let's talk about that now, So moving on to my third tip, be ready to find compromise. I think that this is one of the biggest issues that people come across with wanting to become a better communicator. A lot of people come into a relationship and they forget that it's not just about them, okay? So compromise is super important. Within relationships, we sometimes forget we're not just, you know, when you're in a relationship, it's not just about you. Sometimes you're in a relationship and you can forget that because you're dealing with something, or you see something a certain way and you feel very strongly about it. But you have to also be mindful of the fact that you're dealing with another person. And this is what makes relationships beautiful and complicated all at the same time, and quite a challenge, because on one hand, it's very beautiful to see two people come together to create a very loving, beautiful existence, right? But then on another hand, it can be very challenging and it can be uncomfortable because you are one person and your significant other is another person. So you can't always expect that you're gonna see things eye to eye, that you're gonna agree upon everything. And just because you don't agree upon everything doesn't mean that you can't come to some type of agreement or you can't come to some type of understanding. You can, but just be aware of the fact that you're not always going to get what you want, and things aren't going to always turn out the way that you would like. You also have to consider how the other person feels, and you have to be open to also communicating that. I feel like as people, sometimes we don't communicate things and we don't say what we want, and then we just kind of go with whatever the other person wants. And then after a certain point, we start to resent ourselves for not standing up and saying what we need. And so it's really that balance of when to communicate and when not to communicate. You have to figure out what are things that you can just like, okay, you know what? That's not that deep. Just let that slide. And when it's something that it does affect you and bother you, and be ready and open to the fact that you might make those mistakes. Like, you're not perfect, you're human. So you might think something's not a big deal, and then you start realizing like, yo, this really bothers me. You know what I'm saying? You're allowed to change your mind, and you're allowed to figure out what works best for you and for your relationship, of course. But I think it's just super important to just keep that in mind. If you want to be selfish in your relationship, that's not going to work. I find that a lot of people just kind of want to act like a brat and just want to have, or just want to be stubborn and prideful and just want to find someone that'll deal with them that is cool with that. And it's just like, yeah, that could work for a while, but you know, you're going to strain the relationship at some point. Like, at some point, people get sick and tired of dealing with the same thing day in and day out. So just be mindful of the fact that maybe you just need a compromise. Like, there are certain things that you can meet a person halfway and say, okay, you know, if you're cool with this, I'm cool with that. You know, just talk about it, work it out to the best that you can. Number 4, don't avoid the hard conversations. So I'm really big about this because I feel like a lot of people avoid the hard conversations. Sometimes there are certain conversations that need to be had, and people just don't want to have them because they know it's going to cause an argument, or it's going to make the other person very uncomfortable. You know, having to say things like, as ladies, we are super it's our thing to be like, hey, we got to talk, you know. And I feel like sometimes men aren't really big at verbalizing things as much as women are. Like, every man is different, but for the most part, as women, we tend to talk more, and we tend to see things that are going kind of left first before they do, and then they'll be like, dang, you was right, you know. But even yet and still, let's say you're a female and your guy is the one that tends to put the topics because you kind of run from the conflict. I think it's super important to welcome the hard conversations. Like, you can have a hard conversation without having to get loud, without having to get frustrated, without having to get angry. Like, it's okay. And even if, let's say, you don't have, you don't meet a compromise at that moment, or maybe the conversation doesn't go the way you anticipated, it's better that you verbalized it the most respectful way possible that you can than if you would have just not talked about it at all. Like, I think that it's really bad to not talk about things that bother you, because you end up bottling that up, and then at some point you're going to explode. At some point it's going to all come out spilling over. And so I notice this with a lot of people, that they're like, I know this is wrong, but I don't know how to talk about it, because every time we talk about it, it becomes an argument. But I think that you just really have to start the conversation on, hey, like, I really just want to talk. I don't want to argue. And again, like I said, all the other points, try to work on finding the information, you know, seeking content, videos, podcasts, try to find things that help you better understand how to verbalize things, how to communicate. And again, it's not just with your words, it's with your actions, it's with your body language, it's paying attention to even like the little things, right? So don't be afraid to have the hard conversations. Don't be afraid to talk about things just because it might make you a little uncomfortable or make the other person a little uncomfortable. I think it's important when something is going left for you to want to make it right, and for you to want to have that talk. Too many people don't talk about things when it's a problem, and then by the time it's full blown an issue, like, it's just, I feel like a problem starts off like this little, what can I describe it to? I feel like it starts off just like this little thing that's kind of pinching you, right? Like, something's wrong, you should say something, right? But over time, it just starts to become like this open wound and this sore. And now you're arguing about 10 other things because you never had a conversation about the one thing that you were upset about. Or you're avoiding it. Whatever you try to run away from is going to run into you at some point. You can't be afraid of confrontation. And I can understand how scary confrontation can be. I think also in relationships, people don't know how to deal with what if things aren't going great. It seems almost as if everything is good, then I know how to deal with that. But if my significant other is not happy, I don't know how to deal with them when they're not happy. I don't know how to deal with the problem and the issue. But I think that just because you don't know how to deal with something doesn't mean that you shouldn't equip yourself with the truth or look for the truth to find it. And so this is something I've been realizing a lot, even with what I do on social media. Like sometimes I put out content that's just so relevant and so important, and that doesn't get the amount of response like it does when I just put something where it's me looking cute and my makeup is nice and I'm walking down the street and the birds are chirping and the sun is shining. And it's because as people, we don't know how to deal with heavy things. Like, we like what's light, what's easy. And so when someone's talking about something heavy or bringing something heavy into the conversation, we don't always know how to embrace that and be open to that, you know? And so you don't want to be that kind of person where you can't tap into reality. Life isn't always happy and life doesn't always go the way that it should. Or the way that we would like it to. But I think that it's important to talk about things that aren't always going great, because if you confront things, you can make it better. And so that's why I'm so big on talking about things that are difficult or hard, because I feel like the only way to fix them is to communicate them. That's the first step. And so just keep that in mind and make sure that, again, when you're tackling those hard conversations, you're being patient, you're listening, you're considering what the other person is saying, and that you're not just listening to respond, but you're really hearing them, right? And sometimes that's really a skill that we all have to work on, you know, like that's just something that it's not easy, y'all. Like, just being really real, like it's very hard to sometimes just listen because we're so ready to respond, or we're so ready to defend ourselves, right? Or to say like, yo, like, I don't agree because I feel this way, or I feel like you don't understand this about me, right? And so I also want to encourage people, right? If it's just really hard for you to have hard conversations, then I encourage therapy. I encourage you going to couples therapy. I encourage you doing these types of things, because sometimes, again, you need professionals. Like, you need people who understand the ins and outs of how to communicate, and therapy can help you with that. And so don't think something's wrong with you or you're a bad person just because you need to do that. You could be doing something essentially that you're not communicating in the right way. And it could be something that you're doing wrong, but it doesn't make you, just because you do something wrong doesn't make you a bad person. And so I think that in order to change and to grow, you have to be challenged in certain areas, and you have to be willing to hear the truth about yourself. You're not always right, you know, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to not always be right. I think that it can be very empowering, and it can help you a lot to recognize where you're wrong at, because that way you have something to work on and something to change. So last but not least, this is very, very important. I feel that these two things go hand in hand. It might sound like I'm saying 2 points, but this is my fifth and final point, fifth and final tip. Choose your battles wisely and don't over communicate. So I think many times the reason why people pick the wrong battles is because they're trying to over communicate everything, right? Like, you want to talk about this and you want to nitpick that, and you want to nitpick, nitpick, right? Don't do that, right? Don't be so big on communicating every single silly thing that you don't see eye to eye with. And again, remember, you love this person, so don't expect them to be the way that you are. I think that love accepts, you know, love understands that I'm dealing with a person that's different from me. I can't expect them to be just like me. I may want to harp on or come down on this or that, or say you should do this or you should do that. But at the end of the day, when you love a person, you accept them, you know, even if you hate that one pair of pants that they wear that has, I don't know, a hole in it, in a spot it shouldn't have a hole in, or you hate those one pair of shoes they always wear, or you can't stand that they chew with their mouth open, or whatever it is, right? Like, there's so many silly things that we can just go on and on and on about and get ticked off about, but you want to be very careful with not making something so silly an argument all the time. Like, choose your battles wisely, y'all. Like, that's super, super important. if you want to communicate something or say you don't like something, that's fine. But just recognize and realize some things are just not worth like constantly arguing about or going back and forth over. And you have to also just recognize and realize, like, what are the things that you really do want to communicate and you really do want to fix? And what are just some things that's like, you know what, I can compromise on that. Like, I can live with that. Because at the end of the day, relationships, again, it's two people coming together. You're going to be different. You're not going to always see things the same way. And don't think just because you're constantly trying to tell a person something that that's going to make them change. Like, you also have to be willing and open to the fact that people are going to take time to change. You may be able to see something in your significant other that's like plain as day that they need to fix, right? And you try to help them or you try to verbalize it to them. And lots of times we do this because we just love people and we just want to be there for them and we want to make sure that they're being the best them that they can be, right? I feel like a person who loves you wants to hold you accountable and wants to tell you the truth about yourself. And I think that that's super important. But just also keep in mind that, you know, they're in their own process and you may be in a certain place in life that they're not in. But as long as you can grow and change together, that's what's most important. If you're kind of in a place though where you feel like you're just on two different pages, you know, my biggest advice is to pray about it. I'm always going to tell people to just lean on God, because honestly, like when God is in the center of your relationship, everything is better and you're not stuck on, like just going into those negative thoughts and nothing's ever going to change and my relationship sucks or my marriage sucks or man, like if only things could be different, if only things could be how they used to be. Well, here's the thing. It's not going to go back to how it used to be. For as much as you want to go back to the past and wish it were just so simple like in the beginning, that's not how it is. Like the person you met at the beginning was it's just who we like to front and be when we first meet people. Or even just like we don't share everything about ourselves off rip, right? We don't trust people, but as you trust them, you open up. You share things about yourself that aren't always as flattering and beautiful and as desirable. And that's okay. You're a real human person. Like everything about you isn't going to be perfect. You know, it's not going to always be hearts and butterflies. And I say that so often because I think people just have a really false perception of what love is. If you want to be a better communicator and you want to be in a relationship, you have to be open to the parts that are even uncomfortable, the parts that might even hurt, the times where you might even feel alone in the way that you feel, but just always be open and ready to forgive. That's something else that I just really want to express just to end this video here. Just really be open to forgiveness. Be open to just letting the other person come around on their time and just see it on their own. You know, for me, I think that's why prayer is so important, because you can always pray for, you know, your significant other. You can always pray for those that you love and those you want to better communicate with. And most importantly, pray again as well for yourself, because there could be many things that you're deflecting or you're pushing off onto the other person, or you think it's just them, they just do this wrong. But you also open to what you do wrong? You know, like that's something that I constantly look at myself and you know, I can be maybe at times my harshest critic, but I've also learned how to be gentle with myself, but also to hold myself accountable. I think that if no one else is going to be hard on me, sometimes I have to look at myself in the mirror and have the hard conversations even with myself. Like, you need to change that about yourself, because if I don't change things, then I can't expect my life to look different. I can't expect things to be going the way that I want them to go, or my relationships to be working. And many times our relationships are not working well, y'all, because we're always trying to look at other people as a problem and not identify with what issues do I have that I also need to be transparent, honest, and real with myself about. So yeah, y'all, I believe this is the whole video. I was actually really surprised that you guys wanted this topic, because I feel like, man, communication is definitely one of those harder conversations when it comes to love and relationships. But I think it's great that so many of you also wanted to learn and wanted to just improve that, you know, and just understand that communication is something you're improving and you should be improving every single day. In relationships, you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have moments where everything's going great, and sometimes we're just bumping heads. There's changes that happen, things we can't control, and shifts and transitions that we're going through in life that start to reveal to us, you know, where we're at and how we communicate and how we see ourselves in our relationships, right? So just be open to the fact to be gentle with yourself, gentle with the person that you love. Don't be so hard on them. Don't be so hard on yourself, but be honest, be real, and be transparent. Don't just try to dust things under like the rug and be like, it's all good and it's okay. Like, no, if you see that something's going wrong, confront it and deal with it head on. Don't run from the problems, because that can also create a bigger issue in your relationship when it could have been just something you could have nipped in the bud, talked about it then and there, and got that over with. I hope y'all love this video, and I hope that this helps any of y'all that are going through, just certain changes in your life or certain things that you want to, identify with and just be better at, moving forward. So yeah, that's my video, and be blessed and stay away from mess.